In this last video, I want to take a look at a couple of mixes with Mixbox on the final output. Now, one of the omissions, in my opinion, from Mixbox is there's no real brick wall limiter. This limiter doesn't have a hard ceiling, so it's good to put something after it. In this case, I've used T-Rac's Stealth limiter, and I have it set doing nothing. It's just there as a kind of gatekeeper, a guardian. And I'm setting this so that it's not triggering anything, but it's there just in case. So let me start by giving you a little before and after, and I've gone to some effort to level match this so we don't get too distracted by the volume changes. And I did it not by attenuating the output here, but by using this view and attenuating the last slider here, the limiter. And so many nice gain staging stages in Mixbox. I find it very effective. It's one of its strengths. So here's a little before, and I'll flick it on, and then we'll look at what's going on. On. Off. On. So you can see this isn't really triggering anything. So what have I got going on here? First of all, now this is not doing a lot. It's doing sweetening. And it just goes to show the versatility of Mixbox. It's got all this lovely modulation and distortion and amp modeling. But it's also nice for some gentle sweetening. I'm starting with the SSL bus compressor. And one of the interesting things I find about this particular iteration of it is that the response is dependent somewhat on the ratio, which is a little unusual. Normally the threshold and the attack and release affect the response. But check this out as I dial it up. So it's triggering a dB or two. As I dial it up, the response changes. Dial up the ratio, that is. And 1.5 is not unusual for this type of context, but I have it at 2. Relatively modest or middle of the road attack and release. And no makeup gain to speak of. So bus compression, glue. Now, a little bit of EQ for sweetening. I have the compressor completely off here. Off. On. So the low gain is really sweet. I'm boosting it a bit here, but the way it's tuned, or the frequency it's tuned at, just really works nicely on this mix. I have the mids set to 2.5K, and I'm not doing anything with those. And then just a tiny tweak on the highs. That's really all I'm using this for. It's mainly the low boost. Now I have the channel strip, and again the compression is off here. So here I'm just using the airband on top. I have it set to 12K and I'm boosting slightly. Here's what I'm boosting. You can hear that. Just a gentle boost there. And then finally this limiter. I have the slowest release possible, so it's doing its job as much as possible as a brick wall limiter. And the drive is what's adding the saturation, so I don't want to go too crazy with it. Off. On. Electronic universe, standing sparkling blast. I think I know where this is going over real fast. Here's another example. And in this case, I'm using Mixbox for a bit of a rebalancing job on the mix. Let me flip it on. Off. On. And here I've leveled matched with the output. So I'm using it a little bit differently. I'm starting again with the bus compressor, again 2:1. These are actually the default settings, but I have this sidechain high pass set fairly high so it leaves the bass alone. And here I'm doing a bit of attenuating and I'm boosting the EQ, but again compensating for it all at the end. Again, I love that I can boost the overall output of this, then compensate later in the signal flow. And now here, the SSL EQ. Off. On. So I'm using the two mid bands. Here I have this set to around 500 and I'm boosting that. That's what I'm bringing out. Just to bring out those low mids a bit more. And same thing with the upper mids. I have this set at 2K. That's what I'm boosting. Just a bit. And they're both right in the middle in terms of width. That's all I'm using this module for. And now here, I've got some dry wet going on with the Fairchild. I've got it set fairly aggressively, but I'm using it in parallel. Off. On. So it's clamping down aggressively. I've got the threshold fairly high, and the time constant is what gives it its character. When it's too low, it's going to grab the transients too quickly. It's too fast. It's just too much. But at the slower time constant, it works better on a mix bus like this. So just tightening it up. And then finally, a little bit of the steel saturation. Just a couple of dB of gain. Couple of dB of cut. Thickening it up. Off. On. So that brings us to the end of these videos on Mixbox. Let me just give you some of my final thoughts. I think there are a couple of really interesting standout modules in here. Now, if you have a lot of other IK multimedia effects processing like T-Rax and Amplitube and Sample Tank, some of the modules might not be that interesting to you, but some are. In the amps, to me, the tone control is a standout. And in channel strips, I really like the EQ comp. I just love the character and tone from it. The bands are all adjusted to the exact sweet spots. Now, in filters, it's nice to have access to all these independent different types of filters, but I really like the LFO filter. It's a standout to me with the LFO that you can sync to tempo. I also really like in the filter section, the wah. You've seen me automate that to great effect. And in modulation, there are a couple of standouts. The ensemble is fantastic for a thickening, doubling effect on vocals. I really like Univibe also. And most of all, Slicer. And this is something completely new. I love that we can feed in sustain sounds and chop it up with these 50 gated patterns. I wish that there was sidechain input so we could feed in our own rhythmic signals like hi-hat patterns. But with the 50 included, there's plenty of variety to make it really useful and musical and fun to use. There's lots of new reverbs that are great. I particularly like the ambience for the early reflections and just situating the input signal in a small space. So this is Eli Kranzberg signing out. I hope you've enjoyed these videos. Enjoy Mixbox, have fun, and I'll see you for more next time.